Come with me and you'll be in a world of pure imagination. Take a look and you'll see into your imagination. We'll begin with a spin, traveling in the world of my creation. What we'll see will defy explanation. If you want to view paradise, simply look around and view it. Anything you want to do it. Want to change the world, there's nothing to it.
Beautiful, that's beautiful.
There is no life I know
1, 0.
to compare with pure imagination. Living there, you'll be free if you truly wish to be.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Business Roundtable CEO Innovation Summit. Our first panel on stage today will be Ambitious Innovation, sustaining U.S. leadership for the next 100 years. Please welcome to the stage panelists Jamie Dimon, Randall Stevenson, Dennis Muhlenberg, and moderator Becky Quick.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see you all. I just want to let you know, if you'd like to ask a question of the panelists, you're going to get your chance at the end. If you'd like to submit a question, you can do that by going to askbrt.org. There's a card on your seat if you want to check it out, too. But you will get your chance, so we'll let you know as that time approaches. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being here today. It's great to see all of you. What you just saw was this video that tells us a little bit about Innovation Nation. And I would say in the 242 short years that this nation has been on the planet, it has clearly led the way on every aspect of innovation. Our big question today is, what do we do to maintain that lead? What do you do and what do you need? And Jamie, I think I'd like to start with you. Just ask, are you optimistic about whether we maintain that lead?
Yeah, well, the United States has these great gifts that we should pray to like every single day, and one of them was schools and innovation, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. So this whole forum is 200 BRT CEOs. If you look at big companies in America, they probably do about 80, like the top 2,000 or 3,000, 80% of the R&D. We drive innovation and jobs and growth. A lot of it's sustainable. It's clean. We educate our own people, but we got to do a better job here. We're falling behind a little bit in AI against China. We spend 4 times what China spent in R&D in this country 15 years ago. It's about equal today. We don't do enough. Companies do a lot, but the government can do more. We have to do a better job training our kids, and we have to make infrastructure where it doesn't take 12 years to build a bridge, that we get them done in 4 years, because infrastructure is also a critical part to having a very healthy and efficient economy.
Hey, Randall, let's jump off on that. Just the idea of what you need to see. I was thinking about the idea that China now has a 2025 plan and a 2030 plan, and we're not sure that our government is going to stay open in a few weeks if we can't come up with some way to fund all of the different places that are needed in the budget. What do you want to see from government?
You know, the government is, the conversations are actually good with the government, and particularly as it relates to our industry, that they're focused on 5G, and they're really concerned that the Chinese are trying to take a leadership position in 5G. Yeah. And I take a lot of comfort in that. I think it's good to hear that. But the concern I have is, they're telling U.S. companies, thou shalt. And so U.S. companies are saying, we're all in, we are doing that. But recognize that the rest of the world is not playing by the same rules as the United States companies are. And so the Chinese are having a significant influence around the world. And the idea that the United States, whether it's 5G, whether it's your industry or anything else, that the United States can on its own support all these supply chains when the Chinese are doing a very good job of propagating their technology and their capabilities around the world, is probably not logical. So what can the government do? I think the government needs to begin to speak to our allies. Our allies need to be aligned with us on this. And we need to be encouraging our allies. I wonder if this is such a big priority for our government, which it is. They're very sincere in this. Why we ever do a trade deal where we don't have these kind of provisions incorporated into a trade deal.
What do you mean when you say they're not playing by the same rules?
So for example, in the United States, none of us use a company that's been in the news a lot lately, Huawei.
Yeah.
However, Huawei is pervasively used in Europe, non-China Asia, throughout Latin America, in Canada. And so the idea that the United States can be this island and set global supply chains, those days are long gone. We don't have that luxury anymore. And so we need to get our allies with us on this and all pulling in the same direction.
Wasn't Britain today pulling Huawei servers out of some of its massive equipment?
Yeah, that was actually encouraging.
Yeah.
British Telecom said they were going to pull that technology out of their infrastructure.
Dennis, what happens from your perspective on this? Because obviously Boeing is the biggest exporter that we have in this country, so you're dealing with other countries all the time.
Well, I think as Jamie and Randall have said, it's really important that we have partnership between the government and industry here in the U.S. and aligned plans on innovation. So export capability is very important to us. As I mentioned, aerospace is the biggest trade surplus generator in this country, about an $80 to $90 billion trade surplus per year. We export about 80% of our commercial airplanes, yet we have 90% of the manufacturing jobs here. So investment in talent is one of those places where we can work together. And I think workforce development, STEM careers, this country is short about 2 million STEM workers compared to what we need in industry. That's a place where government and industry could work together. And I think the government can also help enable our investment in innovation through things like tax reform. Mm-hmm. When you think about tax reform that was passed last year, the ripple benefit to our economy is extraordinary. And the biggest thing we're doing with tax reform benefits is we're plowing it back into innovation and R&D. That's creating jobs and it's creating competitive advantage.
We are fortunate enough to have an incredible job environment today with incredibly low unemployment, 3.7%, and probably headed down from there. But all three of you have faced the same issue that so many employers have, which is how do you find the people to do the jobs you need, the people who are skilled in those ways? And I think all three of you have really taken a hands-on approach. Maybe you're tired of waiting for them to show up at your door. You're actually getting out there and trying to train yourself. Maybe you can talk a little bit about some of those efforts.
Yeah. So the BRT, again, you can get the book of all the things we all do for work skills. So this could be apprenticeships out of high school, it could be trades, it could be community colleges, certified technical education. In all cases, they go on to college. So it's not like you take one path and that's the end of the path. A lot of this is done locally. So when we talk about government working in collaboration, it's also the cities and the states. So some of the impediments for infrastructure, education comes at the city and state level. So we all have microcosms of where we're trying to get these skills, STEM, in some places construction. It's got to be done locally. And the BRT now has a test kitchen of like 11 cities. We're going in with some major BRT companies, working with local civic society like the not-for-profits, the charter schools, and the government, and trying to find a way, how can we massively accelerate returning America to the best education system on the planet, and we're not even close today. We used to have among the best, and we're no longer close, and so a huge effort being made on the part of the company. In addition to all the training we do ourselves, I would guess you guys spend billions of dollars training your own people.
Yeah, tremendous amount of investment going on there. And Jamie well stated, the BRT together, our companies in our supply chains, I know in my company's supply chain, 13,000 small businesses here in the U.S. that are part of our supply chain. They all need workers too. So this idea of getting to kids while they're in grade school, right? Things like the FIRST Robotics program, vocational training, internships. These are things that are paying big dividends. And again, on the tax reform side, day one after tax reform was passed, we announced we're going to invest $300 million additional in our people, training for the future, upskilling for the future, digital jobs for the future.
I would say this is probably one of the most impressive areas when you look at the BRT population in terms of what the BRT companies do to educate their own people. And you said it, a little bit of it is you can't sit around and wait on the government. And so we all have some very specific skill needs that we have. And in a tight labor market, you can't just go out and replace your people. You have to reskill your people. And so there's some incredible activity, as Jamie talked about, going on within the BRT companies.
Randall, what's the program?
Including very green. I mean, this is a lot of sustainable work. So you go to the Boeing exhibit over there, they'll show you a flying car, which is electric and very safe, because we're going to be some of the first buyers of these cars. And,
Prototypes flying next year. So Jamie, Randall, I'll get you guys lined up.
Drone pool, yeah.
Next year? Flying car?
and self-driving, basically, too.
Prototypes flying, autonomous flying vehicles, electrically powered.
When am I going to see them flying around New York City?
Not too long. I think it's going to happen before many of us anticipate. This is a real convergence of technology, autonomous technologies, new innovation, artificial intelligence, control technologies, hybrid electric power systems, all combined with the idea of designing a sky grid, a regulatory framework that allow this all to be done safely. You think about urban congestion, 2/3 of the world, or the country's population living in urban centers over the next 20 years. Urban congestion and essentially turning highways into three-dimensional highways is a big part of that innovative future. And we're going to start flying vehicles next year.
I mean, I have a vision of the Jetsons in my head. Is that overdoing it, or is that really what you're...
It's even beyond that. Right? So think about a future where you have this capability to fly three-dimensionally in complex congested airspaces in urban areas, the ability to connect at high-speed flight around the world, 2 hours between any point, and then eventually we're going to have low Earth orbit space travel will become commonplace.
I mean, this
All of
sounds
that's
amazing,
being
and I want it, but at the same time, I think about how I don't want drones flying over my head right now because I'm afraid they're going to drop on them. How do you do it safely? You mentioned regulation and doing it with a regulatory framework.
One of the big things we're working on, and you can see it over in our booth here, is something we call SkyGrid. So we've just launched a joint venture with a small company called Spark Cognition, where we're designing that future grid. So think of this as air traffic management for future drone travel. And the idea that you're going to have piloted and unpiloted vehicles in the air at the same time. They have to be able to operate safely and in an integrated way. And this is taking advantage of the new digital technology. 5G is going to play into it as a bandwidth capability. We're going to need a lot of 5G. And this is the kind of innovation that's happening in America, right? It goes back to what Jamie was talking about. This country has an incredible innovation engine. We just need to continue to fuel it.
One of the ways, I mean, the fuel that feeds all of this would be capital expenditures, and there's been a lot of focus on that. Randall, AT&T spends more than any other company in America on capital expenditures. What did you say, $24 billion this year?
24 this year. We announced 23 next year.
$23 billion next year. That's ramped up, even though you've, for a long time, been the biggest CapEx spender. That's ramped up, and why is that?
Well, tax reform. I mean, it's real clear. When you take less of the profitability of companies and allow them to reinvest it, they invest it. And we're seeing that. I think gross fixed investment this year is up 7% year over year. And I just think that's really, really important when you think about an innovation machine, infrastructure that Jamie is talking about. Most of the capital spending that we're doing, the increased capital spending, is 5G. It's fiber deployment. It's infrastructure on which all of this new technology runs. And so tax reform, I think, is one of the most powerful catalysts we could have seen for an increased capital investment.
Can I just mention, there's so many misconceptions about tax reform. The world had a 40% tax rate 20 years ago, and over time, the average OECD country, like 27 nations, come down to 20. We stayed at 40. The net result of that is that when people had a choice, often their companies, their headquarters moved overseas. American companies were actually at a disadvantage buying another American company, and thousands of American companies sold out to foreign companies, and trillions of dollars got reinvested overseas. That was the result. Now, that wasn't everyone's choice. If you're a US-only company, it didn't make any difference. But that was what happened. People were putting research centers in Vancouver, plants around the world, so now we're competitive. It had an immediate effect. You raised rates. We all took, most of us took wages up to $18 for the lower paid people. Most of us all get medical and things like that. Some people announce new plans and some people announce new R&D. But the real benefit is the cumulative retention of capital reinvested in innovations which create growth, which is inclusive in the United States for the rest of our lives. The notion that we can have an uncompetitive business tax system and that would be good for the United States is a crazy notion. And the notion that you're going to see all the benefit in 1 year, it was never meant to be. Then, of course, some people got the money back and they didn't know what to do with it in the short run, so they bought back stock or paid down some debt. But again, people act like buying back stock is bad use of capital. No, it's not. You buy back stock, that's a redeployment of capital to a better and higher use. And we have to educate the American public, particularly my Democratic friends, about how that's beneficial for all of America.
And it's not a coincidence, to his point. When you see this capital being redeployed, this country for the last 20 years has been stagnant on wage growth. I mean, literally stagnant. We've also been, for the last 10 years, stagnant on productivity. The two go hand in hand. They're not unassociated. And the idea that all of a sudden you see capital investment begin to move up, and for the first time, we're seeing what? We're seeing productivity move. It's finally moving. And as a result, we're seeing wages move. And so these things are tied together. I think it's been a very powerful impact from all of this.
And that ripple effect to small business is very clear, right? As we said, big businesses are helping to drive this capital redeployment, but the ripple effect to our small businesses, our supply chains, is very clear. You know, Boeing's about 140,000 people in our company. Our supply chain here in the U.S. is 2.5 million workers. A lot of these are high-end manufacturing and engineering jobs. That's where the real benefits go, and that's where you're seeing wage growth, you're seeing technology investment. A lot of the manufacturing technology of the future is in these small businesses. That's the benefit of this capital redeployment.
When you say you see the ripple effects, you see it how? In that the supply chain starts hiring more, they start ramping up?
They're hiring more, they're ramping up production. You take, again, look at our aerospace industry. Worldwide traffic's growing at 6 to 7% a year, passenger traffic. That's enabling us to ramp up production here in the U.S. This year, we're going to build more than 800 commercial airplanes. That's an all-time record. By the end of the decade, we'll be more than 900 airplanes a year. That is all being driven into our supply chain. That's where you see the growth.
And small business confidence is almost at an all-time high, partially because of regulatory reform and more orders coming from companies. And so you're starting to see the American animal spirits. Consumer, business, and large company, medium-sized company is all very close to all-time highs. Off a little bit, we think most because of trade, but all quite good.
That's what I was going to say. There have been some wobbles in the stock market, today included. If you look at the last couple of months, there's certainly a lot more volatility, and the wall of worry.
What's it right now?
What's that?
What's it at right now?
I don't know, probably 24,755 if I had to guess. But if you're looking at these wobbles that are taking place, I listen to it on a daily basis, this wall of worry. Is it trade? Is it a slowing global economy? Is it the Fed's raising rates too quickly? I know that's short-term stuff, but you can't get away from the short-term when you're trying to build confidence for long-term investment. So how do you do that?
I feel like we're trying to talk ourselves into a slowdown. I'll be quite honest with you. You know, every CEO that I've spoken to at the BRT over the last day and a half has talked about, yeah, it's good. I mean, things feel good. But everybody says, but there are clouds on the horizon, right? We had Larry Kudlow.
Which have always been there.
They're always been there. Larry Kudlow was in today. He couldn't say enough good things. Christine Lagarde had very positive things to say about the economy. And our view is it looks really good right now. As long as businesses keep investing, we believe it continues that way.
Yeah. And some of these near-term trade matters, you know, they're important. They have to be dealt with. And I think it's important, you know, the work we're doing with China now and the fact that there's a productive conversation coming out of the G20 summit, I think it's encouraging. But we can't take this near-term volatility and let it distract us from the long term. Right. These are good long-term investments that we're making. And that's the view we have to have. That's what drives growth, is that long-term capital strategy.
So Dennis talked about flying cars and the grid that's going to be built up against it. Randall and Jamie, I'd ask you each, what are you most excited?
A very economic thing, too. I would say that the stability built in the system, because these companies, none of us invest money and make decisions because of the quarter or even next year, exactly, or the 2019 is going to grow at 2% or 2.7%. He's going to spend $23 billion regardless. You know, we all have a lot of people to serve, and the stability, if you look at recessions, the larger companies pretty much are very stable and just keep on doing their job and invest for the long run in this country and around the world, and I think that's kind of important.
Right.
Yep.
But what's the most exciting thing you're working on? Randall, I guess it's 5G, but tell us a little more specifically what 5G is going to mean from the consumer.
You heard a lot of what it's going to mean, but 5G, that's just, I mean, it's an instantaneous network. Whatever you want, it happens without any latency whatsoever. And so you cannot think about autonomous vehicles, especially flying vehicles, but even autonomous cars, if you don't have connectivity with no latency. I don't know about you, I don't want to be in a car where there's latency and something pulls out in front of the car, all right? You need instantaneous connectivity. And so 5G is what affords that for the first. I've never seen a technology like this that will change, I believe, how the world works, literally.
You told me it does a movie in 1 second.
Yeah,
High-def
immediate download.
movie, yeah, in 1 second. But think of everything you do around AI, anything you do. So for us, it's risk, credit, fraud, market underwriting, cyber protection, stuff like that. You can do in that split second what used to take you 20 seconds or 2 minutes or 2 hours. And because of that, you have a much higher level of protection. So everyone's going to deploy it in one way or another in ways we can't even dream of today.
So the guys over here will get really upset if I don't point out, this is an example of what 5G brings. So this is Magic Leap over here. We asked them to come. We're partners with them. And Magic Leap is they call it mixed reality. But think about, ultimately, because of 5G, you don't need to have all the compute, all the power, all the storage in this thing. Ultimately, it's all in the network because it's so powerful. Now you begin to have an augmented reality experience that looks like this pair of glasses rather than a big headset. You know, like some of the things like you see at Facebook, you know, these big old things. What we have over here is the first cut at what this is going to look like, and it's very exciting. It's mixed reality. You're interacting with the world while you're seeing incredible alternative reality, if you will.
And the applications are incredible. So that we've taken that technology and bring it into our factories. So you see in our factories today, we have people and robots working together. We have virtual reality with our mechanics so they can assemble the airplanes real time with digital data. And you know, other exciting things we're working on, the space program. The nation's space program right now is incredible. We're doing more than we've ever done since the Apollo program. And I'm not sure the whole country knows about it. But we're building a low Earth orbit ecosystem. We're building a CST-100 Starliner that's going to fly next year for the first time. And with NASA, we're building the Space Launch System. It's going to take us back to the moon. We're going to build an orbiting base around the moon, and then we're going to Mars. And the first person that steps on Mars is going to get there on that rocket that we're building today with NASA. This is bigger than the Apollo program and something that can really excite that next generation of talent.
I think the CEO ought to be that person.
I'm saving a seat, Randall.
Hey, Jamie, not that the big banks aren't sexy, but top that.
I can't top that.
Okay.
What are you working on that you're excited
But you know, banks having a healthy financial system, and it's not just banks, it's venture capital, private equity, non-banks, shadow banks, is a flywheel and spin of what makes a country successful. Mm-hmm. You go to any country that doesn't have it, they're not successful. You go to any country with not successful large companies, they are not successful. So this spin wheel just properly allocates money and ideas and capital, not taking risk, kind of mitigating risk into all of this. Yep. So these guys raise a tremendous amount of capital in addition to that, but Magic Leap had to get venture capital at one point. We bank 4 million small businesses. They need money, and we're always trying to come up with creative ways to do it. So we started this Entrepreneur of Color Fund. You know, small business of people of color have a hard time getting money to grow because they don't have the family, the mortgage to fall back on. Special fund, affordable housing. It's developing economies around the world, city by city, state by state, business by business. That's what the financial system does. And then it's a supporting actor in that way to all these folks here. And of course, on the consumer side, we give you bill pay online. You can now buy and sell stocks for free if you have a Chase account, a Sapphire account. And regulatory reform. I've been wanting to open a branch in DC for 10 years, okay? And regulators made it clear they didn't want us to. We now opened our first one in McPherson. It's enormously successful in the short run. We're going to be opening 400 markets around the world, 4,000 direct jobs, 20,000 indirect jobs, and every town we go into, affordable housing, lower middle income mortgages, small business mortgages themselves, credit cards, middle market, private bank, client bank, investment bank, and that helps grow the society. And that was held back by regulators.
Why didn't they want you here?
They thought banks were taking too much risk or something like that, and I told them very nicely, we already do investment bank, we bank the government. We do investment banking, private banking, commercial banking, small business banking, credit card, auto, mortgages, and they said it was too risky to open a retail branch. That's the way they thought. We now, fortunately, have a new bunch of people in there now.
Let me ask you guys again, I alluded to this earlier, but with China with a 2025 plan and a 2030 plan, and Jamie, you mentioned that we used to spend 4 times what the Chinese did, and now we are spending about equal amounts on AI. How do you address that? What happens? Is that government money that has to step in? Is that private-public partnership? How do you come after it?
So R&D, there's these guys, huge amounts of R&D, all companies, and then government being conducive to R&D. How they tax it, incentivize it, and how they do it themselves. So the space program, the moon program, Apollo, created a huge amount of technology. So there's nothing wrong with the country saying, my schools, my STEM accounting, my businesses, let's have this big part of an agenda. The government does not have to do it all. But they can't resist it with too many rules and regulations and things that stifle it and stuff like that. The issue with China, their complaint about China isn't that they have a policy to grow innovative industries, is they want to do it unfairly by stealing IP and by subsidizing state-owned enterprises to compete with these guys. That is unfair. And so, that's why you hear the difference between China's 2025 and, having good government R&D policies.
It's not just China that's doing that, though. There are other nations, and Dennis, you're probably the clearest example on this board of somebody who is competing against subsidized, government-subsidized competitors. You said yourself that we would like to see resolution with these trade talks with China, but is there a point where you want the government to stand up more and say that this is not okay and this is not an even?
Well, it's important that we have a level playing field. That's why I said, there are some challenges with China that we think do need to be addressed, things around intellectual property, tech transfer, broader issues that ensure a fair playing field, level playing field for the future. And we love to compete, but we want to compete on a level playing field. Our biggest commercial airplane competitor in Europe, Airbus, they enjoy government subsidies. They enjoy an unlevel playing field. And so the U.S. government has an important role to play in helping to make sure that we have a level playing field. And that's continuing to be an important policy for the future. I think another big role the U.S. government can play is year-to-year budget stability. So here in Washington, D.C., the fact that year to year, we just don't have stability. And I look through the lens of the defense budget as an example. And the fact that we can't do long-term planning because the budget year to year is very volatile, it just doesn't enable smart capital investment.
That makes
this is another area where the U.S. government can help by just providing longer-term stable budget lines.
Didn't you tell us that the government probably spends $50 billion extra a year because of that?
Yeah.
Just defense.
There's a good deal of inefficiency. Some of it's regulatory reform that's needed, acquisition reform. This idea of doing long-term contracting, multi-year contracting, services contracting, what we call performance-based logistics, the kind of models that we have in the commercial business being applied for defense customers. There are a wealth of ways to drive efficiency in how the defense budget's being used. And I know the Pentagon is keen to jump on those, but we need political support on the Hill as well.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense, but I think of the practicalities and just the system of government that we have, where you're in for 2 years if you're in the House, you're in for 6 years if you're a senator, and you're in for 4 years if you're a president. If you're talking about long-term planning and not being able to change those budgets, you're saying that one administration to the next couldn't change their priorities, and that's a practical system of living in a democracy. How do you?
And that's the political reality we have to deal with, but I think it's also fair to say that if there was a view to a long-term plan being valuable to the country, and regardless of party, I think if you get through the political surface, everyone would agree that there's some value to long-term planning. And that doesn't mean you can't reprioritize funds over time, but we can do a lot better job with stability than what we do today.
But this issue you're talking about is a huge issue, not just in terms of budgeting and so forth, but just in terms of how industries are regulated. We've gotten to a place where I don't think our legislators, if I could be perfectly candid, don't do a very good job of legislating. The legislation they pass is really vague, it's not specific, and so what happens? We've made regulators legislators, and so depending upon who's in office at a particular moment in time and who they put over an agency, the rules just swing back and forth like a pendulum. And you talk about an impediment to long-term capital planning. That is probably one of the biggest issues we deal with. And we're actually finding ourselves on things like privacy and so forth, saying, please pass laws so that whoever is president next or whoever is responsible for the regulator next doesn't have this pendulum swing effect. Let's write good laws.
The government wasn't built, and this is not a criticism of government, it wasn't built to deal with the modern age of this kind of speed. And somehow the government's going to have like a strategic offsite and decide and reorganize a little bit to allow certain things to take place consistent in a way and not make every one of those part of the political battle. And they've done that before. They did that with base closures at one point because it just doesn't work. And of course the Chinese have a system where it's controlled at the top. They just simply can tell everyone in this room what to do. And most of those people salute and go do it. So we do have to come up with a better way. There are experiments on the ground in cities that are doing a great job at this. And all of us invest overseas. Most of us are in lots of other countries. One of the first things you look at a country is that. Consistency of law, consistency of rule of law, consistency of regulation before you put billions of dollars in the country.
I just think about that though, and those all are kind of ideas that harken back to a time when there was a lot more bipartisanship in Washington.
True.
It's hard to see much of anything get passed these days, and I just wonder, in the conversations that you have with legislators, with the administration, what's the feedback you get on something like that? Because it sounds like a great idea, it makes common sense, but I'm not sure that it's going to get any traction here.
I think if I could wave a magic wand, I would say eliminate the word comprehensive to anything done in Congress, because we always try to do comprehensive things, and you do comprehensive things, what do? To get legislation passed, you don't get into specifics. You kind of leave it at a high level because we can get people to vote, and then you hand it to a regulator. Here we go again. The regulators are then driving the ebbs and tides of how businesses are regulated. So I just wish we could get far more specific on what our legislative objectives are and write real laws.
All right, we're going to come to the audience for questions in just a moment. So if you have them, go ahead and send them in. What do you think the biggest risk is? If you had to look at all of these things that would keep you from your mission or keep the country from its mission in terms of what you all are talking about, Innovation Nation?
Well, I think one of the things that we're spending a lot of time on goes back to this workforce issue and the education system, the talent investment. We simply don't have enough STEM workers for the future. And the definition of that future talent is rapidly changing. You look at the technology disruptions around us, from AI to autonomy to robotics to 3D printing. It's changing the nature of STEM career fields. The manufacturing jobs of the future are vastly different than today's manufacturing jobs. So there's an element of retooling, reskilling, upskilling, as well as training that future pipeline of talent. I think that's a dramatic need for our country, and one that frankly spans both parties. I think it's a place where we could actually come together and do some useful work. And I think that's one of the biggest risks that we face as a business, but also one of the biggest opportunities we have to build the best talent for the future.
Randall?
I could not conceivably agree more with Dennis that it's a people issue. All of this is going to be people driven. And I get a little frustrated when you think about all the technology that we talk about up here and how every single facet of our society is being just transformed by technology. There's about one place that I can conceive of where technology has really not made a significant impact, and it has to make an impact, and that's in education. Mm-hmm. We still educate largely the same way we educated 50 years ago, and the opportunity to change how we educate our young people and how we reskill people is there, but we're going to have to commit to it. Rules are going to have to change around how governments handle education and how people are motivated and compensated.
Okay. James?
I think, we have this blessed nation of ours, and what's held us back is us. It wasn't the Chinese, it wasn't all these other things, it was us. And if you go through what we're listening to, it's bad policy. Again, I'm blaming everyone. I'm not trying to point fingers. We spoke about taxation, impediments to innovation. We used to be the best at work skills, and we no longer like number 29 in the OECD nations. Our impediments to infrastructure, a legal system has become more capricious. And I can go on and on. It was us. It's just bad policy. And so, you can argue the bad policy was partisanship. You can argue it was a whole bunch of different things, but we'll do fine. But if we got better policy, and then the other one is, most of us think that good growth will be inclusive. We'll get wage, actually wages in the lower end are going up much more now than everything else. You know, so you have low unemployment. As a matter of fact, I travel the country, people are complaining about it. But good policy will drive growth and get higher wages to younger people and retraining middle-skilled people who need it. And that's what we need to do. And you know, the BRT tries to play a very positive role in doing what's good for all of America in an inclusive, shared way, and including supporting things like the earned income tax credit, things which can help people at the lower end and get jobs and dignity of jobs and bring people back into the workforce. And you know, we put healthcare in the category too, by the way, so we're trying to work on how we can, it's 20% of GDP, the rest of the world's at 10, that is going to become a competitive disadvantage. And so that's an amazing thing, and we have some of the best outcomes, best medicine in the world, but we have equal outcomes to other people in terms of child mortality, longevity, et cetera. And even longevity directly relates to productivity. Sick people, you know, who get sick younger, and whether it's a drug thing, hurt the productivity of all of our businesses. And so there's a lot to do that we should do for ourselves, good policy, and we've got to educate the American public why these things are so important.
The initiative, the healthcare initiative that you at JP Morgan are working along with Amazon and Berkshire Hathaway, is that something that you would eventually roll out best practices to the BRT? Is that something you're just looking on for yourselves?
Yeah, that's a long-term thing where we're getting some very smart people. A lot of companies are already doing a lot of this, by the way. Looking at all the issues, end of life, you know, high deductibles didn't really work. Like in Washington, D.C., a lot of you probably had blood tests or MRIs. You have no idea what they cost. And the variation is sometimes 500%. And so the lack of transparency, lack of information, wellness programs, obesity, someone estimates cost the country $1 trillion a year, and obesity drives heart disease, lung cancer, diabetes, depression, stroke, and we know wellness programs work. And how can we get policies that get more wellness programs working for Americans, and nutrition? Like maybe we should teach nutrition in high school. You know, and some very basic stuff. So it's a long-term thing. It's not meant for the three of us. You know, initially it'll be us. It'll be open to everybody. We're hoping as we learn things, we're going to share with the whole world.
All right, let's get to some questions from the audience. And I didn't pick these, but Jamie, the 2020 presidential election is right around the corner. Is an innovation policy agenda something that 2020 presidential candidates should be focused on?
Absolutely.
You want to expand on that?
That's why we're here. Absolutely, it should be focused on.
Yeah. You think it will be?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure it is.
Dennis, will humanity someday be a multi-planetary species? What are the chances of colonizing another planet someday? And do you think a human mission to Mars is possible in our lifetime?
Absolutely.
Are you going?
Will the
I was copying Amy.
Will the Boeing relocation plan cover that?
Yeah. By then it will. But yeah, and this is not going to take a long time, right? This is something that's happening now. As I said, we're building that space launch system today. We're going to be doing first launch, test launches here over the next couple of years. We're going back to the moon. We're going to establish a permanent presence on the moon. So this is much different than Apollo. And the administration, NASA, we're very focused on getting that done. Set up a permanent presence on the moon. We will colonize the moon. We'll set up operations there. We're going to build an orbiting lunar gateway. Think of that as a low-gravity launch point to assemble additional space vehicles that will then hop to Mars. And we will colonize Mars. We will put people on Mars. And I'm confident that's going to happen, I'd say, before I finish my Boeing career.
Really?
Yeah.
If we send them to Mars, can they come back? Or once you're there, you're there?
We only go to Mars on round trips. Yeah.
Would you go?
I would.
Really?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
When he puts his foot down, he's going to say, this is one giant leap for mankind, but only one little step for Dennis Muilenburg.
No, and it's, low Earth orbit in particular is going to quickly build into a viable ecosystem. We're building vehicles, ours Starliner, as I mentioned earlier. Other companies are working on destinations in space, space hotels, space tourism, space manufacturing. This idea of 3D printing can be done more effectively in a low gravity environment. So a lot of economic reasons to be operating in low Earth orbit. And that ecosystem over the next decade is going to become commonplace. And
I mean, it's such a stretch when they can't launch people properly to the International Space Station at this point. And
that's why the country is investing in that next generation launch capability,
yeah.
right? Again, that's something that, frankly, we've allowed to wither over a couple of decades. And now the re-energization of our space program, investing in launch, investing in these capabilities. It's going to create economic value. It's going to create new economic opportunities in space. But even more importantly is the technology and people ripple benefit. Jamie mentioned earlier the technology ripple from the Apollo program. What we're doing now is going to benefit multiple industrial sectors. And nothing inspires that next generation talent more than to say I can go work on that next generation space vehicle.
All right, Randall, this one's for you. Oh, wait a second. It went away. It come back. Oh, here it is. Randall, lots of people are warning that China will win the race to 5G. Are they outperforming the United States in 5G deployment?
No, they're not. The U.S. is definitely ahead. We have a very nice lead right now. We are, in the U.S., we're deploying. We're actually bringing markets up. We'll have 12 markets up by end of year this year. Verizon has a number of markets that they're bringing up. China is doing tests today. However, China has declared this a focus area for their country. And they have said this is an area they want to be involved in. They have been involved in the standard setting process around 5G like we have never seen the Chinese involved before. And this is why I was in the very beginning talking about why I think it's really important if we as a country believe this is a high priority for us, that we establish a lead here, that we make sure that our supply chains are secure. It's networking. So security is going to be everything. You think about the stuff Dennis is talking about wanting to do. It's going to require 5G connectivity, secure 5G connectivity. So protecting that and ensuring that our supply chains are good, viable supply chains. You know, we're doing things like, is all of our silicon made, you know, in the United States? Yes. Is all of our equipment manufactured somewhere that we know where it's being manufactured? Yes. However, guess what? All of the software associated with the equipment that goes into these networks is developed where? China. So you have these weak links that I think we as a country are going to have to deal with, and we're going to have to make this a priority if we want to stay ahead here. It's critical in this area that the United States establish a lead, because if we don't, the supply chains will deteriorate and China will by default have a lead position in 5G.
Is that not just a competitive disadvantage, is that a concern when it comes to security?
Absolutely. Very much so. Yeah, and I, as you think about how much networking has become critical to everything, I mean, without networking, your business would be hard to imagine, and then yours as well. And so networking is critical, but secure networking is everything. And so from a security standpoint, ensuring a supply chain that we have confidence in is really, really critical.
All right, I'm going to ask you one more question for each of you to answer. In terms of measuring our success with this vision of Innovation America, how will you all judge yourselves and judge us as a nation, let's say 5 years and 10 years from now? If you are successful, we will see X. If you don't have this, then it is not successful. What kind of measurement standards are you
I'd say America should still be the innovative leader of the world. It's been inclusive. A lot more people have gotten proper jobs and well-paying jobs. A lot of them being STEM and technology. And we'll go back to where we know that we don't have this low anemic growth, that we're back to a more sustainable, higher growth, which is good for all of Americans.
Randall?
Yeah, I mean, if everything we've talked about here is successful and we execute on it in 5 years, what should we see? All the great technology and everything you're hearing here, that to me, that's kind of a byproduct. The real important part is, do you see average wages moving up considerably? Do you see full gainful employment? Do you see people qualified to do jobs and roles that they were not qualified to do before? That to me is kind of the fundamental reason you do all this, not just for cool technology, so that you have a vibrant society and a vibrant economy.
Dennis?
Yep. And the close parallel to that is the talent pipeline. So it's a healthy, sustained, vibrant, energized talent pipeline with the right skills for the future. It's what enables all of this.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for your time today. And folks, thank you for being with us for this kickoff to what's going to be a very informative and entertaining day. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.